So the Facebook page Feminist40K is trying to spearhead an SJW movement into Warhammer. It's doing this by advocating for rules that are in place in any reputable FLGS and acting like it's the voice, asking for female models in Warhammer, not the tail end of a long agitation by the fans to get new female guardsmen, new plastic sisters, and all sorts of other models added to the range to diversify it. Oh, and did I mention female Space Marines? Yeah, they kind of focus on that a lot. Now, if I was to surmise the reasons specifically why they want to change the fluff behind Space Marines to make it so that women are, Space Marines, I'd have to guess that they're trying to mess with the lore for, well, their own political interests and trying to alter an army because they aren't in it. It's not being put forth that it would improve the lore inherently, but rather it's being put forth mainly in the name of diversity. And, well, diversity is already pretty well in place in most Warhammer lore. I mean, if you need feminists, in an army in order to play it, I mean, there is already Adeptus Sororitas and the Tyranid. Plenty of dyed hair and to go around. The idea that your identity needs to be injected into every single aspect of every bit of lore is possibly one of the most self-centered, self-aggrandizing, and tone-deaf demand to any fandom. The problems with this line of thinking are possibly clearest in Marvel, where every single major hero has been replaced in the name of diversity, and the stories revolve around the fact that they are part of this new group identity. It has resulted in the characters being diluted to what its identity is and how it relates to their race, their gender, their religion, rather than, well, who they really are as an individual. What sets them apart from everybody else, and how they overcome their struggles. And you find similar patterns to this in other forms of media, TV, movies, where it shifts from the characters in the story to the character's identity. This isn't to say that sometimes identity can add to a story, but the way that intersectional feminism focuses so heavily on identity and the particular ways that it views identity, it just makes media dreadful to engage with. But that's a different discussion, so let's just get down to the nitty-gritty bits and pieces of this argument. So the Marines are essentially just genocidal post-human monsters. They're made entirely for the purpose of war. Their chapters draw direct inspiration from historical knightly orders such as the Knights Templar and the Teutonic Knights and Knights Hospitaller and so on and so forth. They're steeped in religious or ceremonial iconography of the Imperium, and they've been likened towards warrior monks or paladin-esque archetypes. The process of making a Space Marine starts by taking the most monstrous, murderous, and tough children they can find and mutating them into a Marine. The modifications to their body are extreme and torturous to the point that what determines who survives the process and who can complete it is simply who is compatible. From there, their life is devoted to cult-like ritual and war. They only share a bond with those they fight alongside with, their battle brothers. Humans are almost alien to them and vice versa. Similar to how the knightly orders of old relied on donations of land and wealth in order to maintain their order, Space Marines kind of do the same thing by taking stock of children from worlds they recruit from, materials from Forge worlds, and just generally relying on the Imperium to fund their creation and their existence. Vows of celibacy and silence were common in knightly orders, and analogous representations exist in the Space Marine chapters. Many of the titles and organizational influences are taken from these orders. And when it comes to battle, the methods of the Adeptus Astartes and knightly orders is, again, fairly analogous. Both were known to fight alone, although, granted, the knights would often use mercenaries, but they were also known to fight along nationalist armies. And the counterpart to the Space Marines would be the Sisters of Battle, the Adeptus Sororitas. Now, they are a cult of religious zealots, armed to the teeth with high-tech armor and weapons, on par with the Space Marines. They both have power armor, they both have bolters, they both have flamers, they both have meltas, they both use rhinos. Now, what starts setting them apart is the lack of genetic implants, but they make up for it by, instead of relying on these physical enhancements, and instead focusing on faith and miracles that are derived from their faith, giving them power. Now, it's quite likely that their faith and the power that comes from it is a bit derived from the war, but essentially, Whereas the Marines are a nod towards knightly orders, the Adeptus Sororitas are a nod towards nuns of the Catholic Church. But they have a bit of a spin on it with the whole nuns with guns archetype. Now, the Adeptus Sororitas and the Catholic Church nuns still do have a lot in common, though. They're both known for vows of chastity, focusing on penitence and purity, and the concept of a sisterhood. But they do starkly depart from each other after that, as the Adeptus Sororitas are a military wing of the ecclesiarchy, whereas the nuns were kind of more of an ancillary attachment to the church, and generally a good way to get rid of unruly daughters. And as one last historical note, the fleur-de-lis is quite prominent in the Sisters of Battle, and is likely a nod towards Joan of Arc, though it could just be more of a nod towards France in general. I think that it's trying to hearken more towards her legacy of a military commander. Now, if you had to describe the Sisters of Battle, the word insanity doesn't begin to describe the zealotry, fury, and valor of the Sisters of Battle. Their conceptualization of war is fundamentally different from the Space Marines, as the Space Marines are generally trying to win a war or at least a battle. The Sisters of Battle are basically just trying to murder the enemy until there are no more things to murder with, i.e. them, or things to be murdered, i.e. the enemy. They feature heavy use of flaming weapons that again ties back into their religious themes of fire and brimstone, but inevitably, these two cults of the Imperium are driven heavily by the strong archetypal roots in our culture and our history, and it helps define the two, and it helps each one have a unique identity. That said, neither of these are really people that you want to have the beer with, you know? They're not people that you really want to see yourself in too much. Their methods and ideologies and even their beings are alien to us. What ties them to us are the themes they act out of our past. Now, if you were to begin altering the gender of either of these, Sisters of Battle or the Space Marines, you would begin to erode these historical roots and some of these, historical themes that they have very well tied into them. But suppose you say that's not good enough. Just with the lore, it could all be rewritten to accompany your ideology. It's true. They absolutely could. GW could pull down its pants and put a giant steamer on all of its pre-established lore. Primaris Marines damn near did that themselves by essentially being demi-Primarchs. Why not add another tech priest to be able to decipher what the Emperor did with vast knowledge of genetics and pacts with the Chaos Gods? Well, what you would be sacrificing are some of the great themes and narratives of 40k, which is fathers, sons, and brothers. It's a strong central theme in the Horus Heresy, as well as through, most of the Space Marine chapters themselves. The feelings of being betrayed by your father, being lied to by your father, just being unappreciated by your father. No other Primarch encapsulates those themes, better than Lorgar. He did all he could for the glory of his father, the Emperor, and he was scorned and shamed for his religious view of his father. The Emperor had his own brother Guilliman punish him by wiping out one of his most proud accomplishments, an entire planet that he had brought into compliance. And these themes just show up again and again and again. We see it with the lion and the wolf fighting each other after storming the fortress in competition. We see it at the various Istavan massacres where the Primarchs purged their legions of, wrongthink, essentially, and then they went after and betrayed their brothers. Our Western culture has strong cultural and storytelling roots when it comes to these bonds of brothers and fathers and sons. We can see these most notably in the Bible, with stories like Cain and Abel, the prodigal son, and Abraham's stories. We have a keen sense of the tragedy when these bonds are shattered. For instance, sticking with the Bible here for a second, the story of Cain and Abel has two brothers vie for God's attention, where Cain is ignored, and that leads to jealousy and murder. We can see the parallels between that and that same case that we were just talking about with Lorgar and Guilliman. Lorgar was, the slowest Primarch when it was coming to conquering the galaxy. Guilliman was the most successful. The Emperor appreciated Guilliman more than Lorgar because Lorgar was going against his very vision. And as a result, Lorgar acts out, strikes down Guilliman, and the Emperor essentially has to reprimand him. So the Horus Heresy, and by extension much of 40K, is a drama of these supermen whose bonds of family have been broken and betrayed, and now they seek to kill each other. They're just at each other's throats at all times. And these conflicts arise from the masculine competition and male bonding that, is heavily featured throughout these concepts. Introducing women into the Space Marines dilutes these narratives and the literary parallels it harkens to. Even more, it impedes on the niche that Adeptus Sororitas uniquely fill with their own intriguing lore and role of power armor badass women. And frankly, if you were to have both, it would saturate the concept. While certainly the lore is less well developed, it is by far more fertile ground for the Adeptus Sororitas than it is the Space Marines. The Space Marine main story is coming to a close very soon. They've announced that the Horus Heresy will be ending. And in doing so, it will essentially, cap the Space Marines, as this is the most intriguing event that they have. And so I ask, if you want to toss away the universe lore, archetypal historical references, and the meta-narratives throughout 40K, for the ideology, for just the word diversity to be stamped on Space Marines, what would you let stand in 40K? There is nothing that could not be subject to ideological purification and purging in the name of diversity. Now, 40K is rife with satire, historical and literary references, thematics, and narrative. It's just dripping in it. And because of so many authors and so much time over which it's been developed, it actually has a fairly neutral lens into that respect. It pokes fun at all sorts of types of extremism, generally by making everything really extreme, forcing the modern intersectional feminist lens, and demanding parity irrespective of any other factors, sacrificing everything just so that you can use the word diversity on it, contorts the view, and begins to color it with a completely different thought process. And I stress this again, it opens up the universe to more intrusions and contortions by ideology, and it will drive the focus away from what makes 40K interesting and focus it on things that are used to divide us. Thank you for watching. If you thought this was enjoyable, thought-provoking, or you just outright hated it, please leave a like or dislike, and feel free to discuss or add your own thoughts in the comments section below. This is the end.